Hello there, it's MA. It's time to say goodbye to March's decks and hello to April's decks. And at the end, I will do some book stuff. So in case you don't want to see the book stuff, you can do what you need to do. Anyway, here we are. It's already about to be April. I'm very behind on watching YouTube stuff. I've gone through a month where I just didn't really feel like watching a lot of what I would call meaningful content because I was already navigating a lot of personal junk. And so I watched a lot of pen tube videos with ink swatches to calm myself down. I'm gonna take the brace off. So you may have seen I posted a video yesterday about some pen stuff. So that's it. Let's say goodbye. These are the decks I worked with. Some of these carried over from February and March. And I think what I might do, I pulled one card from each. So I've been carrying the Asherah Tarot in my bag. I've been using Squid Kick Marseille for daily draws. And then I've also been using Druidcraft, the Modern Mary Oracle, Jumble Dance Tarot, Outsider Tarot, the Mother Tarot, Morgan's Tarot, which is really an oracle, the Conrad Stain 1909 Roses and Lilies facsimile for Make Playing Cards, and the Shadowland. The Shadowland I've been doing with the Oz project, but Sylvain's taking a pause over there, so I haven't used that as much. So what I may do is take one card from each of these decks and kind of do a closing out the month spread or something. I started doing, I think last month I did a month ahead spread with one card from every deck, and I kind of like that as a way for them to say goodbye to each other before I put them away. So I'm going to try something slightly different for April, which I've picked 2 tarots and 1 oracle for each week. And they really don't, I'm not looking at decks that match each other or go together. I really started looking at which decks haven't I really been using and kind of pulling 3 of them together. But before we get to that, I've had the Asherah as my pocket tarot for a few months, and I'm going to switch that out now and move on to the Prisma Visions mini in a tin. I haven't been doing a lot of readings outside the house, like when I'm at work, but if I do pull tarot at work, it's upstairs in a common cafeteria space that's really, really well lit. So I think that might be a good space for me to use this deck because it's so small and detailed. My eyes can't really use it too well in a dim space in my house. So that's the first one for the month. Then I was using Squid Cake for daily draws. I'm gonna use this Kawaii Tarot for the month of April for no reason other than I don't really use it that much. I feel like this is one where the cards are pretty busy, and that's the kind of deck I tend to use for the daily draws. Something kind of busy, just a regular kind of simple, something that's not trying to give me some deep meaning other than whatever tarot has for us. For example, like I consider Druidcraft something that's trying to go in a more extended direction than a simple tarot card meaning. So I'm just going to use that for the month, see how I get along with it on a 1 card at a time basis. Yep, so that's those 2. Then for the first week, I'll show you the boxes, but I also pulled 1 card out from each so I don't have to open and close the boxes. For the first week, I'm going to use the Blue Earth Tarot, also known as the Cyanotype Tarot. That was a Kickstarter that came in I haven't worked with yet. The Sacred Sisterhood deck, which is out of the box and in a bag, and the Earthcraft Oracle. So here's a sample. Again, I don't think anyone would look at these cards together and say, oh, look how they go. So they don't really match, but I have a feeling that with all of these, it'll just be interesting to combine them and see what comes up. So that's week 1. For week 2, I've got the Nicoletta Ciccoli Tarot, this Divining Poets deck with Rumi quotes, which is a text-only deck, and a deck that's been sitting in the drawer and I've really barely used it, the Tarot of the Divine. And here's a taste of what these look like. Tarot of the Divine, the Rumi cards, and the Chicoli. So we'll see what these decks have to say to each other in their week. I'm trying to put little bits of structure in my life in some ways, and see how that works out for me. I've been kind of freewheeling it for a long time, and that approach is not working in a lot of facets in my life. So, you know, I'm trying to break into being more intentional and planning better. Now, these next three for the week 3 are all in pouches, so it's not really going to tell you much, except that this is the Numinous Tarot in a pouch. So for week 3, I've got the Numinous Tarot, the Hedge Witch Botanical, and the Enchanted Tarot, which I recently, this was the one with the huge cards, the huge borders. I trimmed it down, took all the titles and the borders off. So that will be, I will say, I've barely used this deck at all, so that will be interesting. And even this deck, the Hedge Witch Botanical, is definitely underused by me. So there's a lot of new stuff or refresh stuff in my picks for April, and I think that was the theme more than saying what looks like the season of spring. It was things where I wanted to refresh or that are new to me that I haven't used much yet. And then for week 4, again in a little pouch so it won't see much, is the Mystical Cats Tarot, the Moonlit Hermit, which is a Collage Marseille deck, and the Language of Flowers Oracle. And just to show you sample cards, that's from the Mystical Cats, no shock. That's from the Language of Flowers deck, and this is from the Moonlit Hermit deck. Yeah, and I'm also giving myself freedom to pull anything else off the shelf that I really feel pulled to use, but I wanted to really look at some decks that I haven't used in a while, or I feel like underused, and find out if I'm underusing them because they're not really working for me, or underusing them because there's other decks that I love so much. I'm just trying to figure out if things are staying in my collection. Not because I feel like I have too many, but I feel like some of them aren't being put to good use. So that's it. I'm keeping it simple this month. Let's talk about a couple of books. So I didn't read much this month. I was feeling a little distracted, had a lot going on. I did a lot of comfort rewatching of Buffy rather than doing much of meaningful things. But this is like crossover hashtag library haul. I happened to see this on the shelf in my library. Magic, A History from Alchemy to Witchcraft from the Ice Age to the Present by Chris Gosden. This took me the whole month to read. It's a chonky book, but I do appreciate, this is really a book about archaeology, sociology. Until you get to the very last, like 4 pages, this is not someone who's, I would say this book is a little more objective, a little more historically rooted in archaeological evidence in discussing magical practice than a lot of things. You know, at first I was reading a lot of beginner-ish witchcraft books, and I think we see information reduced to memes and repeated and kind of passed on as fact. And this was I thought this was a really good read. It is a little dry. It took me, I couldn't read more than maybe 20, 25 pages at a time. But I feel like it was definitely worthwhile as someone who's moving away from reading a lot of these how-to books, other than from the perspective of reading them to get a specific person's take on their practice or as information and not as a how-to. This was a really great crossover because I'm really moving away from, you know, the witchcraft aisle at the bookstore kind of situation. So I do recommend it. If your library has it, that's a great one to take out of the library. I only finished one novel. Speaking of libraries, a lot of libraries near me have book sales. I had picked this up for 50 cents or $1 years and years ago, and I have been trying to shop my house and not buy books. And pick up things that I had bought at some point and give them a try. So this was called Her Fearful Symmetry. The book, The Time Traveler's Wife, was very popular. It's probably 20 years ago now. I liked this okay. It was very atmospheric. It's definitely a kind of gothic tale. It wasn't particularly memorable for me, except for the atmosphere of it. London, cemeteries, weird twins. So again, this is one, if you're looking for something to read and you take it out of the library, might be worth some time. And then let's move to something a little bit different because it's not directly related to the tarot or anything else. So April is National Poetry Month in the United States. I've been reading less poetry than usual, again, because I'm in a kind of, emotionally whatever state, which I'm managing. I'm not a pity party. But, poetry, contemporary poetry can be pretty heavy, and sometimes it gets to be a little much. I haven't read as much as usual, but I have a couple of books. I like to, when I come across books that I think, if people have an interest in reading contemporary living poets, I think there's some books that, I could recommend are pretty accessible yet interesting to folks. So here's a couple, one of which I don't have, but I'll give you the name of it. So, okay, this happens to be by someone I know, Jennifer Franklin, someone I've been in workshops and, gotten a lot of guidance from over the course of my writing thing. But her newest book is called If Some God Shakes Your House. And I really love this. There are 3 different series of poems happening in this book. There's a series of Memento Mori poems where she's talking about bygone objects. There's a series of diary poems that are prose. And there's a series where they're written from the perspective of Antigone. So I think if you have an understanding of myth, so this is what like the diary poems might look like and what the Memento Mori poems might look like. I think the Antigone poems, as you read the book, will start to make more narrative or linked sense. But you can also read them standalone. So I'm going to put a link in the description notes to a poem that's been, one or more poems that's been published online for this book. You don't have to go get books, but sometimes, I don't know if people are aware, a lot of literary journals publish online versions, and it's just a way that you can access poems in kind of a no commitment way. And again, I'm going to say library books. If you are someone who has an interest in poetry, requesting books from your library does help encourage the libraries to obtain the books and to keep them in circulation. So I really enjoyed this one. Franny Choi is another contemporary living writer. This is their newest book, The World Keeps Ending and the World Goes On. I think this book is also accessible and interesting. There's a lot of concern in it, for climate and other changes going on that, seem to cry out for versions of hope. Franny's writing is a little more interested in kind of inventive language, but I think it is still accessible enough to anyone who's coming to read it from outside of, the poetry scene. So I think this is another one that people, if you wanted to have a look at some of Franny's writing, I'll put a link to a poem or two in the description. And then the third one is by a writer named Sean Singer. And his latest book is called Today in the Taxi. And it's a series of short prose poems that he wrote kind of based on when he was a taxi driver in New York City. But I won't say that that's what it's about. It's more about consciousness and leaps of consciousness. And I think sometimes that's where I see the big tie-in between tarot and poetry, is these juxtapositions. So there is a little bit of a narrative structure of a passenger getting into his cab. But I think the taxi is functioning as a liminal space, and he's almost like the ferryman, and, the passenger gets released on the end, and we never find out the end of anyone's story, only the consciousness of the driver and what other associations and things he's thinking about while he's driving. Very accessible. I found that and I don't mean accessible in a pejorative way. I mean, it was like pleasurable to read, and I thought it was interesting. So again, he's had a lot of those pieces published online prior to the book coming out, and I'll link a couple because sometimes you taste a new food, and some you spit out and some you like. So those are the books I finished in March. There's some I didn't finish, but started and have in the pipeline. And I'll flash a couple of those, some of which, again, are from the library. So, Anatomy of a Witch, I thought I would finish in March. I just didn't manage to. And I'm almost done. Yeah, I'm enjoying things about it. I think I lost my steam in terms of keeping up with the exercises, and that is almost always what will slow me down from reading any kind of book that's in the the witching or magical zone. Is, if I have to stop and do something every 2 pages, I can't keep up. But I'm just going to finish reading it because there was a lot in here that I really enjoyed. So I'm going to finish that. And in the interim, I did finally kind of start working through some of the exercises in the Sigil book. So I think I'm finally on track. And this really is changing my perspective of sigils a lot. I'm only about halfway through. So yeah, I'll keep on working with that. And then a library book that I've only barely just started is called Silence, A Social History of One of the Least Understood Elements of Our Lives by Jane Brox. I've had the pleasure of meeting and is a beautiful writer, and I'm really excited to get further into this, just to give you a kind of over. Sometimes if I see the chapter of a book, I can kind of get a sense of how it's going to go. Part 1 is about, or centers on, Philadelphia's Easton State Penitentiary, 1829, Experiment in Silence. There's sections about the monastic world, Philadelphia again, the silence of women. I'm especially intrigued to read this section. And her writing is beautiful. And yeah, again, a library book. The library. And I have 2 books of poems that are in my house that I'm going to read, and I can't really tell you much about them yet, except that I've listened to readings by both of these writers, and I did want to pick up the book. So Fort Knott is by Emily Skillings, and You Don't Have to Go to Mars for Love by Yona Harvey. So that at minimum is what I will be reading in the month of April, with hopefully more if I get my reading energy back in gear. So that's about it. Oh, and I have been rewatching Buffy, and I've been watching the conversations about the Buffy tarot, which I didn't order. I don't order any of the pop culture decks, not because I don't like the Pip decks, but I guess I always just thought I'd be disappointed. And yeah, I may go watch a few reviews now, because I've seen some grumbling in a couple of online groups about how the guidebook was full of errors, but then I know someone else who's kind of outside, the tarot chit-chat world, who's really excited to have it. I know someone else who's in the tarot community that's excited to have it. So I'm quite curious, but I decided again that it was more valuable for me to rewatch Buffy and think about tarot while I was watching it, much in the way I was creating a tarot about The Office, the US version of The Office. And ultimately, I decided it was way more valuable to me to bring tarot to my watching of the show than it was to try to extract the show onto a deck of cards. And I know it, while I was working on that, a publisher came out with a deck, so I never bothered. And I also never even watched a walkthrough of it. So it's weird. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That just popped out of my brain for no good reason. Okay. Well, happy April, everyone. Have a great month.